do you remember a time as a parent when you played outside, right? Where you weren't, as a little kid, on screens all the time. You actually explored your world. You went around and ran around the neighborhood with your friends. And do you sometimes grieve that kind of loss of how kids are just seemingly always inside and they're always on screens more? Definitely, even the stats show they would prefer a screen over that play many times. But there is a way to change that in your family. There is a way to help guide them towards something healthier. And that's why we wanted to bring on our guest today, Dr. Anthony DeBenedet, author of several books on roughhousing and play with your kids and how to, in those early years, start helping them be more apt to choose that type of play rather than just leaning towards screens, which is all too often what kids are doing. So he is the author of several great books. One of them that we love, Art of Roughhousing. Another one that just dropped a couple years ago called Unplug and Play. And so I encourage you, if you're struggling, if your kids are on screens too much and you're saying, please give me some tools to help my kid do this differently, he's not only going to show you ways to do that, but also give you the in-depth science of what's actually happening when you are roughhousing with your kids, when you are spending time wrestling with them and getting on the ground with them, that you're actually wiring their brain to be a healthier human. So take a moment today to really get ready to dive into the joy that can come from roughhousing with your kids. Now, if you haven't already, please take a moment. It's so helpful to rate, review the podcast, leave a comment about how this is helping you. Share this with other families who you know could benefit from this information. Sara and I, we just so badly want to help families have closer, more connected, healthy relationships with their kids. So I hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Art of Raising Humans.
The Art of Raising Humans is a podcast designed to support, equip, and encourage parents on how to create long-lasting, deeply connected relationships with their kids that's free from fear and shame. Come join us on the journey. Hello, and welcome to the Art of Raising Humans. I'm Kyle.
Hi there, I'm Sara.
And Sara, something that we've always been pretty passionate about, and we just recently did a podcast on connection and how important connecting with your kids is, and a big part of connecting we hear a lot is through play and through, just getting on the ground, doing things with your kiddos.
Yeah, that's very important to us.
But something that I think a lot of people have heard about, but kind of miss the power of it is roughhousing in particular, and I think early on when I was learning to be a dad, that was the part I was the most excited about. Like I struggled with getting on the ground and just playing, but throwing them around, that was actually pretty fun, right? But did you know there's science behind that? And so that's why, listeners, we wanted to introduce you today to Dr. Anthony. And he is an expert in the field of many things, but particularly what he's been writing about is about the power of roughhousing with your kids. And he's going to hit on a lot of different topics. Playful intelligence is something, so we're going to hit. So
excited.
We don't want to waste any time on this. So Hello, Dr. Anthony, and welcome to our podcast.
Hi, Kyle. Hi, Sara. Thank you guys so much for having me. It's a thrill to be here. And I love the concept of the art of raising humans. The book with, like you mentioned, the art of roughhousing. I love the idea of the art of raising humans because in the end, that's what we're really trying to do. That's our most important job as human beings, is to help kids kind of make it through this trek of life that we're trying to make sense of and enjoy.
That's why we loved that name. And of course, we're also drawn to your book in that sense. Is I love this creativity of parenting. That parenting, you can talk about techniques, and yes, there are some techniques that are better than others, but inevitably it is about helping a parent be secure and confident in their connection with their kids, so then they can be creative in how they do all that, how they handle situations, right? And there is an art form with each family. So I wanted to hear, how did you get passionate about roughhousing? Because that's what your expertise is in, right? You're like, you've got a doctorate in roughhousing. Is that what it is?
So I'm actually I'm a practicing physician, but the roughhousing thing I kind of stumbled upon. I was we had 2 kids at the time. This was early on in my training, and my oldest, Ava, was going through this really, really intense kind of mommy only stage
Yes,
where
been there, been there.
yeah, where
Yep.
essentially I would come home from work and try to connect with her, and she would, like, look at me and then just kinda run away screaming.
Yeah.
"Oh, great to be home."
Yes, I know. I'm so glad. Should I go back to work? Maybe I should go back to work. Yeah, yeah.
And so I kind of and everything. I mean, it was bad. I couldn't do bath time. I couldn't do bedtime.
Mm,
Even at the dinner table, it was kind of like I was just this banned and shunned parent, which is, later to find out it's a very normal thing for kids to go
yeah,
through. But
yes.
I was like, I need to hit the science. I need to figure this out as to how I can kind of best connect with her. And so I started just kind of reading about play, and because I remember my dad and even my mom used to play kind of physically with me, whether it
Mhm.
was just when I was young and wrestling and rolling around and doing fun activities, or even as I got older in sports and whatnot. But so I started looking at a lot of just kind of play research, like hardcore foundational play science and research, which was a lot of this was done actually in the Midwest and the University of Wisconsin and Minnesota in like the 1970s, 80s. And it's really fun research to look at if
Yeah.
any of your listeners ever, these are people that go to playgrounds. This is going to sound a little bit sketchy, but they go to playgrounds and they basically observe kids playing and how are kids
Yeah,
playing and like,
yeah, yeah.
tell the school first.
That's right,
Like,
yes.
back then it was like, okay, I'm just going to go observe some parks or some playgrounds. And so what was interesting, there's a lot of different kinds of play, but what I was finding and reading was that rough and tumble play, which is kind of the scientific term for roughhousing, um, really had, at least what I was seeing, really had a kind of a good bang for its buck, so to
Mm,
speak. And that
yeah,
there were a lot of things like there's the like you said, Cal, there's no perfect magic bullet when it comes to parenting.
yeah.
You gotta have a lot of different tools in your toolbox. But as I was reading about rough and tumble play, I was like, oh, this looks pretty good. Like, okay, it helps with your connection, helps with emotional intelligence for the child. It helps with even is there all these things are kind of popping up. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll try some of this. And so I one night I came home and Ava's my oldest daughter. She's now in college. It's crazy to think about that. But
Wow. Yeah.
she kind of ran away, did kind of her typical thing. And then after dinner, I said, Ava, how would you like to kind of come with me um, to the world of flying machines? And she's like 3 years old. Yeah, like, I don't know what that means. I said, why don't you jump on my back? And so she jumped on my back and we kind of raced up the stairs in our apartment condo and got her into it. And she was laughing. And I'm like making these kind of rocket ship noises, like I'm pretending
Yes.
like I'm this rocket ship. And I kind of drop her off into her room. And then she looked at me and she's like, she's like, Daddy, or she's like, mommy, do bedtime. And I was just like, oh, I was like so dejected. And I walked out. And as I was walking out, she's like, but let's do that again, like tomorrow, let's do it
Mm,
again.
yeah, yeah.
And so then the next couple of nights, I was like a hot air balloon one night. I'm like I'm like a jet plane the other night, and
Yeah,
she just started to kind of really like the ritual of that.
yeah.
Um, and that kind of physicalness and me kind of bouncing as we walked up the stairs and then having kind of crash landings and stuff is what started us on a better road
Yeah.
to connection. And that was basically that. After that week, I then called Larry, Dr. Cohen, you guys have
Yeah,
had
yeah,
on for Playful
yep.
Parenting. Out of the blue, I cold called him because I had also looked at Playful Parenting and there was one chapter, I think it was like 11 pages, that Larry had written on Roughhousing. I said, Larry, I'm Anthony. You don't know anything about me, but I'm a dad and I'm a doc and I'm just trying to figure stuff out. And I think that we could do a whole book on this.
Yeah.
and that was how the art of
That
roughhousing
is
was born.
awesome. What a cool
That's the story.
partnership. Well,
Yeah.
I resonate so much with your story because it sounds like we both have pretty awesome wives who our kids like and like want to be
Yes.
with them. And so
Yes.
there was this frustration of coming home. And I remember acting like such a child where I would come home and I'd say to our oldest, who's now 15, I'd say to her, hey, can I put you to bed tonight? Because I'm home early tonight. And she'd say, yeah, Dad, I want you to put me to bed. And then as we started to go towards the bed, she'd say, no, I actually want mom.
Right,
And then
like,
I would
change your
say,
mind.
I'd be like, you said you wanted me. And she'd say, no, I want mom now. Well, you know
Right.
what? You said me. And then Sarah would say, Kyle, she's just saying it's hard to transition to you. No, it's too late.
Yeah.
She already said she wanted you. I'm like, don't get, no, now I do want you, Dad. No, it's too late. And I was like, I knew in my mind, like, this
Uh,
isn't healthy. Like, this is what is wrong with me?
yeah,
But
yeah,
I
yeah.
found myself becoming like a 5-year-old kid saying,
Right,
no, you rejected me. I'll reject you.
right,
And that's
right.
almost similar to you. I was like, I've got to help her with this transition. I've got to help her in a different way. I can't just expect her to be like, mom's doing it most nights of the week, and then bam, you do it. She's
Right.
just saying, mom knows my stuff. She knows how to
Yes.
help me relax. You just don't, Dad. And
Yeah.
I love how you came to that same conclusion that the roughhousing and the play was the way to help the kid switch their perception of that, and that it didn't have
Yeah.
to be this like, no, take care of my feelings because my feelings are hurt. So say you want me instead.
Right. I think that's exactly it. I think that's honestly, if you even go to like 30,000 feet, that's kind of one of the hardest things in parenting, right? Like there's this kind of disconnect or disagreement or shunning by a parent, and you kind of, you, your emotions start they start ramping up and they're kind of like, okay, no, this is how it should be. No, you kind of dig in, and then your kid digs in, and
Yeah,
then it's kind of off to the races in terms of an argument or a meltdown or whatever it is. But I like how you said earlier too, like the key is trying to stay creative and
yeah,
trying to think about, okay, what can I do here differently, and how can I creatively it's not really, some people associate sometimes creativity with distraction, like distracting the
yes,
child into a
yep,
different frame of mind. I don't really think of it that way. I think of it as more of redirection. Distraction to me always has sound kind of like, oh, I'm trying to like trick my kid. It's much more of a redirection and see if we can find a different, see if we can get back on track,
yeah,
basically, on a more of
yeah.
a connected track.
No, I think it's a
But
really
yeah,
good point because lots of times when I've mentioned those kind of things you're saying, is then the parent will say, "Oh yeah, I do that," and then I just distract them. Like, no, you're
right,
actually trying to just find another pathway to connection.
exactly.
So
I
it
love
isn't like
that.
we're trying to avoid the moment or avoid the feeling. I'm just
Right,
trying to say, "Hey, this way of connecting isn't working. Let's go a different path."
right,
Well,
right.
I did a lot of my background a lot is in play therapy and working with little kids,
Cool.
and to me it's just tapping into their language of play. They do so much of their world is play, and when we join that world of play, it connects. They feel seen, they feel heard, they feel okay, now you're talking my language, to tell me, oh, dad's going to put me to bed. I could just see for her how it threw her world upside
Yeah.
down to say, I'm
Yes.
used to this routine with this person. We've been doing this for years. And now you come in, and how
Yeah.
just that just mixed everything up for her. But when you come in with her language of play, you could see that switch where she goes, oh, okay. I can have fun with you. I can
Right.
connect with you. And it starts moving in a different direction.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you had said, real briefly, you had mentioned that you were seeing all these great things about roughhousing. And I want to go back to that because you kind of touched on a couple, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about what
Dive deeper.
what
Yeah,
are the
Sure.
benefits of this play, of what were, you were touching on them, but I'd love to
Yeah.
hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of I think of it in kind of 3 little basic buckets. Well, actually really 2. The first is kind of an intelligence bucket, and we'll dive into that a little bit. The second is more of a connection bucket. And the first bucket, the intelligence thing was interesting to me because I was reading about this concept of brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is, in neuroscience terms, it's kind of like fertilizer for neurons and developing neurons,
oh
especially
wow,
in developing, especially in young kids. And especially, it's interesting, that BDNF is kind of the acronym for it. Um, roughhousing and kind of physical play that can kind of feel a little risky is really, really a great stimulator of BDNF. And it just helps build kind of just different neural connections. And that's really happening in a developing brain, as you guys probably know better than me. But like it's, like ages of 2 to 12 is really where that's happening a lot.
Mm,
And peak ages for roughhousing is like basically 2 to 10,
okay.
um, where the kids are really wanting that physical kind of connection with their parent or guardian, and kind of they're liking that kind of feeling, and that's really when BDNF is just kind of flowing. But that's like if you want to just stereotypical intelligence, that's what that is. That's what that's doing is neurons are being built and you know various things in the hippocampus, not to get too scientific, are forming in terms of memory, ability to remember things. But anyway, the more interesting thing to me was the concept of the emotional intelligence piece. Um, and the idea of that with roughhousing, and Larry may have mentioned this too, because we really kind of geeked out on this this natural arc thing. So the concept is that roughhousing and most play, but especially roughhousing, follows this kind of natural arc of starts off low intensity and then the energy level gets high to high intensity. And then there's a wind down period. And it's interesting. Boys can get on to that. I have 3 girls, but I'm a boy. So I get,
You you
um,
can speak to that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Boys can get on that arc real fast, and so their energy and their kind of just intensity of the play can get up to the top peak of the arc very, very fast. Um, Girls sometimes take a little bit longer to warm up, but once they get to peak, they can be just as peak and just as bananas and just as fun and
Yes.
intense as boys can. But the key is that that wind down period is really, really critical. And that's where that emotional intelligence and kind of the dimmer switch that we all want as for our
Mm,
kids to have on their
yeah.
emotions, that it's not just like an on off switch, but and we want it as an adult too. And we're constantly working on it all the time throughout our adult lives. Nobody ever told us that we have to work on our emotions forever.
Yeah.
Um, but that's what roughhousing's doing. It's you're going through this natural arc, including the wind down, and you're feeling what it feels like to feel really, really high intensity,
Yep.
and then to come down on that emotion. So you're kind of building that dimmer switch as you're doing that natural arc of play with with roughhousing, and that translates to the emotional intelligence. It's interesting though that we, as parents, and I think this was probably one of the hardest things we were when I was digging into all the science on this, is that we get scared.
Mm,
Teachers get scared too, like on the playground when they see
yep.
an energy getting really, really
Yep.
intense, and we get scared. We get scared because we care. So we care. We don't want anybody to get injured. We don't want tears. We want everybody to have a good time. But we get scared, and that fear sometimes causes us to stop the energy or stop the play at peak energy. So like like classic example is you know a parent just, really revving things up before bedtime and then basically saying, okay, now we have to go to bed. And the kid's like, what? Wait, whoa, what do you mean? I think I'm like bonkers right now.
Yes.
What do you mean we have to stop immediately? And when you stop the action, the children just don't know what to do with all that energy and
Yeah.
all that
Yeah.
emotion. Um, and so that's what we talk about in all of our workshops,
Yeah.
Larry and I, when we're doing them together or doing them separately, is to really, really honor that kind of wind down period because that's the key for the emotional intelligence.
There's so many
Um,
moms who say what you said, Dr. Anthony, where they're like, my
mhm.
husband's doing what you're saying, Kyle. He's doing more roughhousing, but it just seems like he's doing it right before bed. And then now they can't go to
Right.
sleep. And so there
Exactly.
is that
Exactly.
misunderstanding. They think it's just that. I remember even before knowing this, something that I guess just happened through our conversations and just maybe through our experience working with kids was we homeschool our kids. So we've got
Nice.
3. And I
Yeah.
remember there was a time when our 2 oldest were younger, and it was hard to transition from waking up, eating breakfast, hanging out with mom and dad, maybe doing some play on the ground, and then let's time for school. And
Right.
there was some grumbling and complaining, and that was kind of triggering me, where I'm like, I wanted them to love school. I wanted them to be like, yay, let's transition to school. And they're like, and I started thinking, wait, I think if I'm curious, here, I think it's because they're just anxious about moving away
Exactly.
from that. So what I did is I had a song from this
Tron.
Tron movie, and it was like a 3.5 minute song, but it was
Nice.
really intense. And I told the kids, here's how we're going to start the morning. When it's time to transition, I'm going to turn that song on, and it is going to be loud, and there's a lot of drums, and you two are going to team up and see if you can take me down. And so you're going to run
Nice.
at me, and I'm throwing them. But once we're done, when that song's over, we're turning it off, and we're going to lay on our backs, and we're going to take some deep
I
breaths,
love it.
and we're going to
I
control our
love it.
body, and we're
Yeah.
going to get ready for school. You
Yep.
know, and so that's something I've told parents a lot about, that example, because that was like magic. I mean, the kids loved it, and they tell them, what if the kids want more? Oh, the kids always wanted more, but that's when I would say to them, hey, here's what we're doing, and we're
Yes.
not going to keep asking more. We're just doing it one time, and then we're transitioning. So I'd have them repeat that back, and then pretty soon they bought into that routine, and it
Yes.
was just so fun. I mean, typically I was so sweaty after three
Yeah.
and a half minutes, but you just saw them ready. It was like they were so thankful that I helped them move through the anxiety of that transition to start school.
I love that idea of the song. I love that. I'm not because what you're doing is actually the wind down. You're on the you're on
Yep,
the bottom part of the arc, and so you're
yep.
winding down with the tron. I love that. It's a cool concept.
What else can it look like to help them if we think, okay, we're going to roughhouse, but what can
Yeah.
it look like to think, how do I do that?
Right. I think the two best things that um I think are most useful is one, just a freeze and then a restart. So like you have like this silly code word. In my house it was banana cream pie. So so anytime anybody would say banana cream pie, that the action would freeze. And you just have to kind of stay motion like statue. And then you say it again, and then you keep going, and then you freeze again. So that's naturally slowing things down just
Yeah.
by freezing, because then
Okay.
it's their physiology basically is slowing down. And the other one, that I often tell folks too is slow-mo, speaking of slowing down,
Yeah. Yep.
is you just start doing the entire activity, whatever it is, the crab crawl or the bear race or whatever game you're doing, or even the pillow fight, and everything just becomes in super slow, kind of matrix motion.
Mhm.
And kids love that. And then
Mhm.
you actually you do slow mo, and then you kind of go, okay, now we're gonna go fast, fast
Yeah.
forward, and then they're kind of going crazy again, and then okay, now we're gonna go slow mo, and then you just increase the frequency of either the freezes or the slow mo, and that helps get you down in the arc.
Well,
Yeah,
that's almost like a red
Yes,
light,
love
green
that.
light type idea too,
same
right?
con.
Yeah,
Yes, very
I'm
similar concept.
but it's
Yeah,
funny how teachers will do that, or they'll do that in
yeah,
gym, and they don't know that there's good science behind this. That
right,
red light, green light is them having to burst and then stop and slow. And like
Yeah.
it's this so
right.
cool way of helping them learn how to regulate all that energy. But I
Yeah,
also love what you said, because I definitely experienced too, where you see the kids' energy ramping up, and you want to stop that instead
right,
of guide it. And
right,
I think that's where a lot of parents, they don't feel confident that they know how to do that, because many
Mhm.
times it's gone sideways. Like they
right,
have tried to just let it go, and what it looks like is they're more being permissive. They're just like, oh, we'll
right,
just see where this goes, and then the kids are out of control, and then they're hurting each other, or they
right,
get hurt, right? So it feels like the only way to keep them safe is to keep them from ever reaching that point, you
Right.
know.
yeah,
And so I hope
yeah,
listeners really caught on to that importance of, man, when they're at school all day. I was a school counselor. I did that for 7 years. And yeah, you see teachers, they're like, hey, we need to nip that in the bud. Like you need to see that. And like, and what I was able to do as elementary school counselor was I was out with the kids playing with them at recess. So I was able to see that and guide some of it. But most of the kids don't have any kind of mentoring like that, you know? And it
exactly,
is constantly, they are taught to be afraid
right,
of their emotions and their energy getting bigger. And so that they learn to try to stuff that, or keep it
Mhm.
down, or not feel safe feeling big
right.
things.
Right. No, you're exactly. It's so interesting. I have such a soft spot in my heart for school counselors, and it's so cool that my wife was a school counselor
Oh
too, and
wow,
she was
okay,
doing
yes.
that too.
Oh.
Yeah.
She did elementary and middle school when we lived in Virginia, and I think it's and not it. this is not any kind of a slam on teachers because I have a
Yeah.
huge soft spot for teachers too, but teachers, just like parents, can't really recognize the energy level very well. Like you were saying, it's
Yeah.
hard to recognize. And so it's funny. The research is so funny. You'll see like, oh, you know, these two kids were on the playground and they were absolutely fighting about to kill each other. And so we stopped and we sent them to the principal. And then two kids are like, no, we weren't even close.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and these are like fourth graders, right? Like these like
Yeah.
third grade.
Yeah.
Like they're not gonna lie, right?
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
like we weren't even close. We were just having fun. We love
Yeah.
we're best friends, and everybody's like, oh, okay. We thought you were like really, we're
Yes.
just not good at
Yeah.
identifying it. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
Or
yeah,
or being hypersensitive and scared of it.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
like
exactly.
immediately or like you said, that lack of awareness will cause parents to go, "My kid just goes 0 to 10." And like, well,
Yes,
no, he does
yes,
like
no,
there is
right,
a buildup, and so part
yep,
of that is helping them, I think, through roughhousing. I mean, what I love it when moms and dads embrace that is like then they get a better sense of watching it in the because you
yeah,
can start to see when the roughhousing is kind of tipping a point to
yes.
where okay, now we're
Into
just mad.
aggression or
Yeah,
violence, you
now
don't
the
want
kid it's
that. Right,
and I'll tell them
right,
like,
right,
"But that's great that they're doing that with you because then you
right,
can say, hey, let's implement something like yellow light.' When I see
right.
that, yellow light means caution.
Yeah,
Let's be, and red light means we're stopping. And
yep,
many times my kids needed to do that for me, not because I was being aggressive, but because I just didn't know what was going to hurt them. So I
yes,
just was like, I was just throwing my son, and he'd be like, Dad, this is like, you just hurt me. I've been, why are you crying? Like, I barely even threw you, you know? And so I think sometimes a parent needs to know their own
yes,
strength and know
yes,
their own
yes,
power. And that's like,
right.
that's, I think it keeps you from getting in power struggles because then you
Totally,
start to realize
totally,
my power isn't to dominate you or oppose you. It is
right.
actually to help you. And in the rough housing, that's what we're doing. We're all
Yeah,
playing together, you know?
and that's a perfect segue to the other piece of the intelligence, which is social intelligence, right? Like,
Hmm.
the idea that the parents holding back their power
Yeah.
and showing how to do that in order
Yeah.
for the play to continue. And you
Mm,
translate that to real life, right? Like, we can't always all be leaders or always all be followers at the same time. We have to
yeah.
be able to work in teams where you have to be able to sit back and give and take. It has to be that way. It can't be a dominant kind of a thing all the time in all of our teams, in all of our social circles, in all of our friendships. It just can't be that way. It doesn't work that way. Human connection doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think Sarah, to get back to your question, the last thing is just that idea of that last bucket is connection. And we know that when roughhousing is going on, oxytocin is getting released, which of course is that, famous cuddle chemical. A lot of research been done on that. And
Mhm.
really what that's saying is, it's kind of like the biological basis of empathy is oxytocin, that hormone, in that you're really saying to somebody, I am here with you. This is a safe space for us to play, to talk, to whatever. And there's no judgment here. We're here to connect. And I think that was really kind of, as I'm reading about this, that's kind of triggered the call to Larry, like, okay, we've got to write a book about
Yeah. Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Like, this
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
good stuff. But no, I mean, and I think too, like the other thing boys and back to the boys and girls thing, because both boys and girls and moms and dads can roughhouse. I think that the stereotype is always, oh, that's a boys and dads
Yeah.
thing, but
Yeah.
it really isn't. It's really for everybody. I mean, the other thing too that it's great about, and this might come across as broad sweeping, but the there's like one important thing that we really want to make sure our boys know before they leave the house, and there's one important thing that we really want our girls to know before they leave the house. And here's the drum roll. For boys, it's like we really want them to know that there's more to physical contact than sex and violence.
Hmm.
Period.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Period. That's what we want
Yeah.
them to know when they
Yeah.
leave your house,
Yeah.
when they go out into the world. And for women, we want them to know that a woman's voice is the strongest thing on this planet.
Mm,
It's the strongest thing on the planet. And, and finding that voice and developing that voice. Um, and I think and roughhousing is great for those things
yeah.
because it's often a lot of kind of body language and nonverbal kind of stuff. And in that, but it's also at the same time, it's also verbal, like, oh, that didn't feel right, or that, fell out of control, or that hurt, or whatever. It's also all of that. And then of course it's also teaching healthy physical contact.
Yeah.
Um, that it's okay to high five somebody, or, reach out for a handshake, or, pat on the back. My kids always ride me about the hug stuff because I'm a hugger. They're always like, Dad, you got to ask before you hug. I'm like, all right, I'm asking before I hug. But I'm still gonna be a hugger, guys. I mean, that's just me,
Yeah,
okay? you
that's
know.
good. That's
But
good.
anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and well, I love how your new book that you have coming out, right? That
Yeah.
just dropped, I guess, came out in 2023. It's 2025, so it's like I
Yeah.
keep
I
forgetting that.
know, it's
But
crazy.
Unplug and Play is the
Yeah.
title, and
Yeah.
I want to hear a little bit more about that, and about obviously every parent listening is like, how do I convince my kid to get off the video games or
Right.
to shift away? And I'm sure that's kind of part of the theme of it. So could you share a little about the heart of that and what you're wanting to accomplish?
Yeah. What triggered kind of the title and kind of the reboot from our publisher, and then also in Larry, my in our minds, was that there's a lot of data, early data, when kind of video, it was partially in the 80s, but also 90s, when kind of computers and computer games became popular. And now, of course, 2000s, where you can get any kind of game anywhere on any device. But a lot of the data was showing that if you give a child an elementary, so this was basically third graders, second graders, if you give them the choice between a screen related activity and a play related activity. So anything like, let's go outside and, run around in the creek or whatever it is, or go out in the woods, or just run around in the street. They will choose the screen related activity over 90% of the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So like, and it's, screens are here to stay, right? But it's kind of gets back to that creative, like, how do we creatively redirect, or how do we creatively kind of get kids thinking about getting off the screens, right? And that's really was kind of the, how does rough and tumble play, or roughhousing, kind of interface with that, or how can it help with that? And I think that was that's unplug and play. So it's kind of a
Yeah, yeah,
reboot of our roughhousing, but it's got a lot
yeah,
of new, some kind of screen related science, and some new activities and stuff. But really, what we found was that it it's not about necessarily banishing screens, right? It's really about two things. One is you as a parent modeling your own screen behavior. That's
mhm.
like super critical.
Yep, huge.
So like, if you're always on your phone and and yeah, how can you tell your kid to not be on their phone or not
Yeah,
be on
yeah,
their iPad? That's the first and foremost thing. And then the second thing is that it's okay to actually participate with your kid. And video games are a way to connect,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
crazy as it sounds. Or even like, TikTok, or whatever social media it is, try to connect on that. Try to
yeah.
connect with them on that. And they'll think you're funny and weird and like, oh, Dad, you don't know, bro. They're all like saying bro, and you're like, okay, you're like, you're totally an idiot. But that's kind of part of your game as a
Yeah,
parent. That's part
yeah,
of your game. And when they were young, you might have just fallen over and they would laugh, and then you'd fall over again and they would laugh again. And now it's kind of like you're the bumbling person who doesn't understand tech. And that is like true story for me. So it's
true
easy to
life
play
story
that
for you.
part.
That's right, that's right,
But
yeah. Uh-huh.
like, that's kind of what it is. And then once you start doing that, and once you start looking at it as not, and this isn't just like, I'm, painting kind of a utopian picture here. It's not to say that we don't need to have rules. Like,
Yeah,
yes,
sure.
there needs to be
Yeah,
some screen rules. Like, and there
yeah,
needs to be like limits.
yeah,
Like, I'm not saying don't have those
of
things too,
course. Yeah,
but I think that if kind of the fever inside, the fire inside your belly is to always put connection as number one,
yeah,
then you just need to kind of get over the fact that, yes, these are bad things. Like, phones
yeah,
are bad for kids. We
yeah,
know that they are
yeah,
bad, but
Mhm.
they're also not going away. Like,
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
as adults, it's not like we're all going to drop our phones. Like, we're going to
yeah,
keep using them. So we have to kind of work with it and be creative. But that's how
yeah,
the roughhousing piece, and activities and physical challenges and all that kind of stuff. That's
yeah,
unplug and play. Yeah.
yeah. No, that's so exciting. Our culture needs that, you
I
know?
know. Okay, so
Yeah.
quick question.
Okay.
It's easy to, I think it's easier to think about this for little kids. Does this apply to the tween teen group? Or can you
Yeah.
just speak to maybe just a little bit of how it does?
Yes. So the biggest thing, so that I will say that once you get to kind of 14, 15, 16, even a little younger than that sometimes, is it changes from kind of the heavy wrestling. Um, and I don't know if I got cut off there. Maybe it did end a little bit. It changes from kind of the heavy wrestling and into more of a physical challenge
Okay.
type of a situation. Oh, you guys are there. Okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. For some reason, my
Mm.
screen just went blank. Speaking of bad tech,
Oh,
that's the tech
Oh,
karma.
you're
yes.
good.
Oh,
You're
Um,
isn't
good.
that fun? Look at that. I'm surprised. Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
so sorry, I'll restate
Yeah.
that. But basically, the idea being that as kids get older, you want to think about more like, okay, what's a physical challenge that we can do while we're just taking a walk or while we're out for dinner? Oh, can we balance on this little parking concrete
Yeah.
structure?
Yeah.
Um, and for me, I like this is gonna sound wild, but like for me, when I was 12 and 13, I was jumping off my garage roof,
Oh my
and like trying
gosh.
to
Yes.
land appropriately and with my dad, and it was like,
Kind
oh
of
my
like
gosh.
talent.
And so I'm not recommending that, although that
Yeah.
is in the
Yeah. Yeah.
book, how
Yeah.
to do that safely.
Yes. Yeah.
But it becomes less of kind of like the pillow fighting and the
Yeah.
wrestling and kind of
Yeah.
you remember the steamroller or the piggyback rides, all that kind of stuff that you remember when they were young. It becomes kind of more of these physical challenges, or even just kind of
Yeah.
sports aren't necessarily roughhousing, but also just playing in a physical way with your kids or getting
Yeah,
out
yeah,
there.
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Or doing TikTok dances, right?
That's right.
Or
That's exactly.
even I mean
Exactly.
something we love to do is hike with our kids, and
Yeah.
my brother and I have both gone and done 14ers, 14,000 foot
Yeah. Wow.
hikes with
Nice.
our kids, and so man, it was
Oh,
such a
cool.
cool moment when my son was 9, my daughter was 12, and we did our first 14er, and just the you could see this like a connection between us, but also this confidence in them of
Yeah.
just realizing the power they had, that they could overcome this peak. And so it's
So
kind of a
cool.
similar thing. It reminded me a lot of wrestling with them with the music, but
Yes.
instead we're
Yes.
walking together up a
Yep.
giant mountain. And
Yep.
it's a similar thing. Like our power is together, but the power now looks like we're encouraging each other. We're helping carry each other's backpacks or things like that to help each
Love
other.
it.
And so we're working together towards that. So Dr.
Yeah.
Anthony, this subject is so fun.
Yeah.
I know what you're
Mm.
like. I want to ask somebody because I
I
want to
know.
ask about adults playing. I want
Yeah.
to do like all do
Yeah.
because I just think it's so
Uh,
pivotal to
yeah.
helping us realize what it means to be human. And even man,
Yeah.
like your subtitle of your play, the one book you have is about not taking the world so serious and like.
Right.
Oh my gosh! Like I wanted to
How
like we take the world way too serious and we're not willing to play enough.
Yeah.
Or is when we're adults, it looks like play is just drinking alcohol a lot or something like that. It's
Right.
not really
Right.
like actually just playing and being childlike, but there's something so freeing. And I hope every listener hears this, that just when you do this with your kids, allow yourself to feel that freedom, to tap into that kid within you, that really your kid wants to see that kid. Your kid wants to play with that kid in you because it feels like I'm not alone. Like you understand what it's like to be a child and you were once one instead of you always being the serious one. So
100%.
yeah, so we love it. I want to ask you anybody who's struggling with this and like roughhousing's hard for me, or I want to know any last words of encouragement that you could give parents about making this a bigger part of their journey.
Yeah, the biggest thing is you're not alone. It can feel awkward, it can feel silly, and just go slow, and do little things here and there. Small little kind of baby steps, getting back into kind of even your body might feel weird and like, oh, I didn't know my back like felt that way when I moved that way, and just give yourself a lot of grace. But it's worth it. I think it really is. Again, no magic kind of you know perfect solution for parenting, but it's a good one to have in your quiver, so to speak.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And if they want to know more about your work, where can they find you? If you could point them.
Yeah, so X is probably the best spot.
Okay.
And it's at 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 is Twitter. X for me. There's also an Art Roughhousing Facebook page.
Oh, great.
We've been updating that a little bit, but we got to get a little bit better at that. But that's probably the best best spot to find me.
Okay, and definitely go on Amazon, right, or all
And
those places
Amazon.
you
Yep.
can buy
Yep.
books. I mean, you've
For
got
sure.
several really good
Oh
books, and I
yeah.
know
Yeah,
we've
love
not
it.
even read them. We're like, "We got to
Some
get
of
these
them,
now."
yeah,
Yeah.
we want to read the rest.
Yes, man.
Yeah. Let me know if you guys ever want it. Playful Intelligence was kind of my response to my own personal burnout as an adult. So
Yeah,
and
Oh,
looking at play from an adult standpoint, just
yes,
personally adult. So yeah.
yeah,
I'm
no,
Cool,
excited
man.
about that one. When I saw
Cool.
yes.
that one, like, oh, this is on my list.
Yeah,
Oh, cool.
and you remember, Dr. Anthony, as we're wrapping up, I remember even in college where life could be kind of serious and you're making some
Yeah.
big decisions.
Yep.
And I remember going to Barnes and Noble, and as a kid, I loved comic books, but
Yeah.
about 16, I thought I was too mature to read those anymore, and it was
Yeah.
too immature. And so at like 21, I was sitting at Barnes and Noble. I'm like, I just want to read some comic books, man. And as I read it, I'm like, I like these. These are fun. And I'm like, why
Exactly.
did I stop reading these? And it was
Right.
almost like this freedom I felt to tap into that kid again,
Right.
and it helped me make some of those bigger decisions.
Right. No, that's exactly it, Kyle. It's really, to kind of paraphrase what you just said. It's kind of the notion of, it's not like we're saying, take life less seriously. It's what we're really saying is just take yourself a little less seriously.
Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
good. Well, thank you so much
You
for
bet,
your
guys.
time. I
Thank you for
appreciate
having
all
me,
your
and
insight.
sorry
Oh,
for all the trouble getting scheduled, and thank you.
you're
Thank you,
okay. No,
guys.
no, yeah, it's so
Thank you for
great.
your
We definitely,
persistence and patience.
I
Yeah.
think every listener is going to feel very empowered to go home and just throw their kids around.
Yeah.
Like, in a fun way,
Love it.
Like just do it in a fun way. Yeah, get that Tron song and just have a fun time today. So, but
Love
thank
it.
you so much. And
You
we
bet, you
really
guys.
appreciate it.
Have a great day.
The Art of Raising Humans podcast should not be considered or used as counseling, but for educational purposes only.